So what makes a great interview?
It's a combination of things. I wish I could tell you it's any one thing. If you're on my newsletter, one of the things I shared the other day was that in a lot of ways, every interview is what Peter Sims, one of my favorite business authors, would call a little bet. He wrote this great book called Little Bets, which is all about the innovation process at Pixar and innovation process that people like Chris Rock use to refine their craft at comedy. Every interview really is a little bet. It's a bet that I can draw insights out of that person, and it's a person is going to be interesting enough and revealing enough that they will share their insights. So it's a combination of things. One, I think, is a very interesting story. Uh, Two is an interesting personality because thinking in a medium like the one we're working in with podcasting, right? It's not just about providing information. There's an entertainment component that is involved. So, I mean, part of my job as a host is to not just think of myself as a person drawing information out, but also as entertainment, and you have to view it that way. And
So,
the other thing is, go ahead, sorry.
so how do you draw out the entertainment value at the same time as drawing out the information?
Well, I wish I could tell you there's a formula for that, but I think a lot of it comes down to the host and the personality of the host. I mean, I've obviously, as I've mentioned, I've refined the craft of it by doing it 300 times. But I think one of the things for me is to let my personality come through in it, and this is the delicate balancing act because in the beginning I was really scared that uh, I my voice would get drowned out, and then one of that I think I've done relatively well is that I balance between me and the guest. Like I'm able to bring in my own perspectives and share my own stories, and so I think really not being afraid to sort of interject, share your opinions, share your thoughts, and be talkative, but at the same time also learning to listen. And having this sort of interesting sort of balance. It's kind of like a dance, right? You go back and forth in a conversation. And so for me, that creates this sort of harmony almost between me and my interviewees. And so that's how you bring in the entertainment component to it. And I think you can't take yourself too seriously. That's the other part I would say is that if you take everything too seriously, then it's obviously not going to be entertaining.
Yeah. So you're saying that you as a host, people are watching you as a host. They're not just watching for your guest. They might be watching for your guest, but they're also watching for you.
Yeah, and that's not isolated to me, by the way. I think that that's to any of the good hosts. You'll find that one of the reasons people want to listen to the show, and this was another eye-opening moment for me when one of our long-term listeners said, we listen for you as much as we do for your guests, and so that's really I think common to anybody who does a good job with their show. Like let's take an example like Mark Maron, right? I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but I just happened to catch some of his, and I was blown away. He'd interviewed Tim Ferriss, and it was the funniest Tim Ferriss interview I'd ever heard. And honestly, the Tim part didn't interest me. The way Mark was asking his questions interested me. So like Mark Maron interviews all these people who are comedians and other people, and a lot of it, the reason his interviews are so interesting is because of him, not because of the interviewee necessarily. And so I think obviously you do have to pick good guests. Sometimes you'll get duds, but at this point, my filter for who should be a guest on the show is pretty you know pretty strong just because I've done it so much. But so you've got a combination of all these different elements at work, and it's never one thing that makes an interview. It's all these sort of different things that really make it what it is.
Yeah. So why did you start a media company to begin with?
Well, first, let's be clear. I didn't start a media company. A lot of how I ended up here was very serendipitous, and that's something that can't be discounted. I graduated from business school, and I couldn't find a real job, so I decided it was going to be time to create one. I did actually end up finding a real job for a short time where I was the head of social media for an online travel company where I oversaw their entire content strategy. And the thing that caused all of this to start was I needed a way to stand out in the job market. So I started my personal blog, The School of Life, and Blogcast FM actually started out as a weekly blog post there called Interviews with Up and Coming Bloggers. And eventually it sort of evolved into what it is today. But the media company thing came from a lot of conversations I had with successful entrepreneurs about a year or two ago. I started to realize was like we can't think like podcasters, we can't think like bloggers, we have to think like publishers because Bloggers and podcasters don't make money. Publishers and media companies do. They run real businesses. And so I think part of that was that it gave you this filter through which you view the world. And then all of a sudden, we started doing what the mainstream media would do. We would look at, I mean, earlier before we hit record here, I was telling you about how we schedule our guests. A lot of that is from looking at the mainstream media. And I'll give you a concrete example of this. One thing that we did, I think in September of last year, it was either September or October, David and I were going over the calendar, and he noticed that all the lists that I had mentioned that were going to be coming up, they were all women. And he said, wait a minute. He said, you can't just have all female guests. This is going to look really weird. And so he said, go back and look at who you've interviewed that is actually a guy. And we did, and we could only find one. And just by dumb luck, I had happened to have interviewed all these women. And so rather than try to put in that one guy in there to balance it out, we said, you know what? Let's actually make an event out of this, and let's call it Outstanding Women in Business. And so we branded it as an event, and so that entire month, all we did was air episodes with successful female entrepreneurs. And of course, they were all fabulous, probably some of our most awesome guests. Like, people loved them. And we used the hashtag OWIB, and so all of a sudden, people are following this hashtag saying, hey, why is it, my friend is tweeting all these interviews with OWIB? And of course, each one of these people are all connected to like hundreds of other women who follow their work. And so that ended up being this really great thing for us. It definitely helped us grow a lot. So that's an example of what I'm talking about in terms of viewing things through the lens of a media company.
So it didn't start out that way. It became that, and then you wanted to turn it into a company.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It started out really as, okay, I'm doing this project on the side, which honestly I think that's how a lot of these things start, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's better than sitting around doing nothing. So basically, we started like that, and bit by bit, it just evolved, and it keeps evolving, and it's still evolving. I don't think you've seen the final iteration of what this is going to be, and I can't tell you, the question of, where do you see yourself 5 years from now is like, okay, that's a loaded question, right? Because I can't tell you. I don't know what life will be like 5 days from now. It's hard to predict, but at the same time, I know we're in this constant state of evolution.
Because of the internet, internet changes so fast.
Everything moves so fast. I mean, it's mind-blowing. And with each guest, again, what happens is our network grows, right? Because we keep connecting nodes to the network, and as you connect each node, all those nodes have connect their own connections, so there's this multiplier effect, and it just gets bigger, bigger, and bigger with every interview.
So how'd you start doing your interviews?
As I mentioned, it started as a weekly series called Interviews with Up-and-Coming Bloggers on the School of Life. And the only reason I did it is because I was in this blogging course called Blog Mastermind, and one of the lessons was to interview people, because interviews are a great way to get traffic to your blog. And I thought, okay, well, cool. And instead of just doing the lesson, I did it as a weekly series, because I thought, okay, I'm going to start a series called Interviews with Bloggers, or Interviews with Up-and-Coming Bloggers, because I was nobody. Nobody knew who I was. But I went into all the forums I was part of and said, hey, I have this weekly series where I interview people. Would you be willing to join? And of course, I reached out to lesser known people because I knew they would say yes. They're more likely to say yes because they were at my same level. And it was a great way to network with other bloggers. And so bit by bit, I built this network of friends. And then one of them came back to me and said, hey, you know what? I think this would be way more interesting if you spun it out as a separate site. And so that's how Blogcast FM started.
What was the design like in the beginning as compared to now? You have great design.
It's funny. First, I have to give credit to David Crandall, who's my business partner, for the design work. The design was pretty awful when we first started out. In fact, the very first edition of Blogcast FM, the very first version of the design, I remember Sid, my business partner, designed it. And people are like, this is such a crappy design. And then another person, after a year of running the show, people are like, okay, the content is great, but the design still sucks. So then I, out of my pocket, I shelled out like $300 or $400 and had the first redesign done. And this, that first version looked much better than the original one. But when David came in and sort of looked at it, I think none of us realized the talent that David had. It was really kind of an eye-opening moment for all of us. And I think what he really did was completely alter our brand perception.
All right, I hope you enjoyed this video, and be sure to like, share, and comment below. Subscribe to this channel for more interviews, and if you want to go further and be live on the interviews, you can go to mmt.tv/live to find out how. Like on Facebook and follow on Twitter to ask your questions, and be sure to get on the mailing list. Go to mmt.tv to to get access to all the things that are not contained in these interviews. All the links are mentioned below, and until next time, break the rules, change the game, and be a rock star.